Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Pricing, the official podcast of the Professional Pricing Society. I'm Kevin Mitchell from PPS, and today we are going to discuss a topic that has become increasingly critical for pricing professionals, for business leaders, for revenue managers around the world, and that is how to protect your pricing power in the face of tariffs and global volatility. And great news today as we're joined by someone with deep insight into the space. Very happy that Mr. Jeet Mukherjee, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Holden Advisors, is with us today. Jeet brings over 25 years of experience. I think that means he started when he was 12. He is an expert in strategy, analytics, pricing, and marketing. He has worked with business leaders from Fortune 100 companies to founders of innovative startups. He's helped organizations respond to market shifts with confidence and clarity. We are thrilled that he is going to deliver a keynote address at the PPS Profitable Conference in Dallas from May 6th to May 9th. Jeet's keynote on May 9th will also talk about tariffs and how we handle them. And also, since we are coming up on the Mother's Day, Father's Day, graduate gift giving season, his book, Pricing with Confidence, 10 Rules for Increasing Profits and Staying Ahead of Inflation, is a great gift for the business-oriented moms, dads, and grads in your life. I would certainly recommend that. It is a great book. It's a must-read for anyone who is serious about pricing strategy and some of the things that we're talking about today. So, Jeet, always good to see you. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. That was quite the introduction. I love this. Yeah, I need to take you with me everywhere. That's really impressive. I'm impressed.
Absolutely. Yeah, as are we all. And of course, you're someone who has always delivered great insights for people in our part of the business world. And I'm thinking of the old saying, may you live in interesting times, because that is certainly what we are in right now. Obviously, we have macroeconomic concerns. We have a lot of volatility. We still have some great fluctuations in raw material goods. And of course, in our part of the world and many other parts of the world, we have tariffs or the threat of tariffs or maybe tariffs and yes tariffs and lots of other things to discuss there. So we're going to start at the top. So, Jeet, tariffs have added a whole new layer of complexity to pricing. So how should companies be rethinking their general approaches, their strategy in this environment where we have a lot of, let's say, interesting things going on?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously, you know me, and I think the best approach is to keep things simple. It really is. In a time of such dynamic sort of ups and downs and, the dynamic sort of rule changes, I think the best thing is to keep things as simple as possible. And what I mean by that is, I don't think there's anybody out there that hasn't heard about tariffs. And I don't think there isn't anybody out there that's not expecting a price increase. So your customer base is already primed and ready to at least have knowledge of what's happening and understand where the type of environment that we live in. So from a consumer perspective, from a B2B perspective, from all of these folks, everybody's primed. So this is not like new information. It's not like you're going out to talk to your customer and the customer goes, what? What's going on? What? I've never heard of this before. So I think we can keep it simple that, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're seeing, whatever's happening, I think it's important to understand that you're not alone in this fight. So what can you do internally to get ready to execute on what's already might be there or get ready for what's happening in the future? Because I think the problem isn't the tariff itself, because we've been through this with inflation. So if you've been through this with inflation, you should have your systems, tools, processes already in place to know and understand where and how these costs are going to affect you. And what kind of contract relationships do you have with your customers to be ready for that type of a implementation, so you're not surprised? Because remember, Kevin, I did the keynote 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and I interviewed all these CEOs before that keynote because we were talking about inflation at that time. And one of the big things was nobody was surprised about inflation, but they were surprised. All these CEOs were surprised by their inability to respond to the inflation because they didn't know how many contracts were out there. They didn't know, they didn't have systems and tools to be able to respond. So hopefully companies have learned from that and they don't have that as a problem, because if you do have that as a problem, you probably want to go back 3 years and try to fix those things first, because that's going to be fundamentally, one of the big things. But if you have that in place, so you know how the tariffs are going to hit, because that's nothing more than another cost change, and you know how that's going to affect your transaction base, your products, and things like that, then you're in a good space, and you know your contract situation with your customers. Then you're in a good space to kind of determine what you're going to do. So it's all about giving yourself choices, right? And now you'll have more choices than before. And for me, when I look at my client base and I look at who is performing well in this space, those are the folks that are asking themselves the question of, how do I make this situation an advantage for myself? Because fundamentally, the cost change you're seeing, if you don't know anything, you can't do anything, or whatever it is, you have to pass that cost all the way through. That's like rule number one. Yeah, you got to pass it through. I mean, I don't know if there's too much more magic than that from the perspective of what you should do. But I think where the nuance comes in is, how do you use this to your advantage? So one of our clients, as an example, we were coaching them on how to, in negotiating big contracts, against a competitor, knowing that the competitor has more suppliers in Mexico, Canada, or China, where you don't have that level of sort of tie, then that becomes a negotiation weapon for you to use to be able to close that deal, because you can talk to your customer about, hey, our prices are not going to fluctuate like our competitors will because of that reliance. That's a subtle change, but it's a very powerful change to use at the right time to be able to make it more of a positive for you rather than a negative that's out there, right? So that becomes some of the nuances that we deal with on a regular basis now in this environment, because the other stuff is easy as far as, hey, prices, cost is going up, try to move that through and you're done.
Understood. And I like your discussion of the competitor who might be more reliant on China, Canada, Mexico, wherever the tariffs are coming from, versus the company that you were working with. That reminds me of the old story or analogy about the bear in the woods. You don't necessarily have to outrun the bear. You might think about it as, what if I can outrun the guy in the sleeping bag next to me, which is the case that you were just talking about, where, of course, none of us are going to be able to run away from tariffs, but we do have to remember, if we are in a situation where it is an advantage or a disadvantage, then we have to take that into account with our strategies. And of course, you start off that discussion with something that we always like to remind people in terms of when things are very volatile, such as hyperinflation, such as when we had the COVID disruptions of a few years ago, going back to the so-called Great Recession and even before that. Keep things simple. Remember your strategies. Don't panic. Remember the value that you provide to your marketplace, to your customers. Remember where you are in relation to some others, and definitely keep it simple. Remember things, and definitely do not panic. We have seen disruptions before. We will see them again. We will get through them. We will survive and thrive. So I like the examples there. So definitely appreciate that. And I know from seeing your discussions and reading your books that you talk a lot about pricing power, but in some ways you discuss pricing power differently than a lot of other experts. And that is, you talk about assessing your pricing power by account rather than by product or customer segment or geography or business unit. But really, you take a great outside in kind of approach and look at this on an account by account basis. So what does that shift? And that's a little bit different than a lot of people when they talk about pricing power. What does that shift in focus allow companies that you work with to do differently?
Yeah, I think in times of volatility, it's important to understand what KPI you're going after, because most companies, most of my clients, they're looking at transactions, they're looking at profitability, they're looking at revenue, how to manage their costs, right? All standard business practice, basically. And in times of volatility like this, we like to add an important element. And sometimes this element takes on a higher level, higher meaning than your profitability metric that you might be using on a transaction basis, which is customer lifetime value. Customer lifetime value, the name of the game in volatility is really to be able to look at the profitability of your customer over a longer period of time rather than this short period right now or that one transaction. Because the more volatility there is in the market and the more you can develop relationships with your customer and share in the risk, and you hunker down together in the trenches to kind of outride this wave, that becomes extremely important. Then all of a sudden you have that relationship and you've got a longer runway with this customer than ever before. So the importance of pricing power and to apply pricing power to accounts is the sharing of the risk. It's the understanding of customer lifetime value. And it's to make sure that you look at this as a short-term period of volatility and change rather than, hey, this is, my price change is there and, take it or leave it, and I'm going to walk away from here. I think the more you have these extreme notions of, of that type of behavior, the more disservice you're doing to yourself in the long run. The other piece is there's also the other side of the coin. You can have that type of a relationship when you know that some customers are taking advantage of you. There is that old principle that holds true, which is 20% of your customers make up 80% of your profit, which means you have a long tail of unprofitable customers. So times like this is a great time to push a little bit more on that long tail. And if some people drop out, it's perfectly okay because they're not that profitable for you. And they haven't been profitable in the long term. So it's a way for you to right the ship a little bit also. So you have to kind of strategically understand where are you in that spectrum of what you should do based on account by account, these types of metrics that you need to look at.
Very interesting. And of course, I definitely like the approach of thinking about this from a customer lifetime value perspective, being a partner, looking for the win-wins there. And I like your Pareto example where 20% of your accounts or your customers account for 80% of your overall profitability. And of course, we've all seen the so-called whale curve where that, let's say the worst 5% of your customer base, it probably has a negative number on that profitability where it kind of goes the other way around.
That's right.
And of course, these are the X's in all of our lives that we are thrilled when someone else has to deal with those problems instead of us.
I haven't used that analogy, but that's a pretty good analogy. I might have to use that on stage.
I think we have to be careful with that one and not mention specific names. So we won't mention specific names there. But of course, there are cases, and you're right. When we look at this by account, there are some things where we can find those win-win partnerships, where we can build those relationships, where when we share in the risk, that becomes a value proposition in itself. I mean, that becomes kind of a product feature or benefit. And that goes all the way up the ladder to the companies that we are dealing with, particularly in times when we have the volatility. So I definitely like that explanation there. So I want to ask a little bit more about pricing power specifically. And you know that in the PPS surveys, we always ask people, the PPS index, we ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pricing power do you think that you have? In our last survey, it was down slightly, but it was down a good bit with our respondents, with our members saying we used to be around a 7 as far as on a scale of 1 to 10, but now we're looking more like a 6 or a 6.5. So what are some key indicators that a company has or does not have pricing power when looking at a particular account?
Yeah. So the way we measure pricing power, we have sort of a high level view, and then it gets down into more details. But at a very high level, we have two axes that we measure pricing power on. One is your price differentiation. So your product or service, how differentiated are you in the market? So imagine sort of, a company that has a highly differentiated solution. They'll be on the far, excuse me, they'll be on the far right on that axis. The y-axis that go up and down, that axis is your go-to-market capability. How well can you take your product or service to market? How well trained are your sales folks? How well trained is your marketing, your product development? Do they use value to prioritize features of your product sets? How do you really go to market and how efficient are you? Then that far right on the bottom side of differentiated product can go in the upper right corner. And that is where you want to be at from a pricing power perspective. It takes both axes for you to have pricing power. So that's a very important notion to really understand, because in our history, and Kevin, you and I have been around long enough to know these examples, not to tick off current companies, but old companies like Zenith. They were so advanced from a television perspective, right? They were in the bottom axes. They're on the far right. They were like, awesome, great IP, right, great TVs, but they were really crappy in going to market, and they didn't last very long, right? And these Japanese manufacturers came in and they were not so great from product differentiation, but they knew how to execute in the market. And they started eating away at the differentiation. You can make the case for AT&T. They had incredible R&D. They had incredible knowledge of voice over IP and other things, but they weren't able to take it to market as fast as some of the other companies were. So it's very, very important. Yes, there are smart people out there. There are great products out there. There's all this differentiation that's out there. That's awesome, but that's not enough. You have to know how to go to the market. You have to know how to train your customers. You have to know how to communicate to your customers. You need to know how to protect your price. You need to be able to give options to the different customer types that are out there. You have to understand your segment that you're operating in. All of those things become extremely important for you to actually have pricing power. It's not just a feeling, it's your actual capabilities on both of those axes that determine your pricing power. So for us, when we look at it from an account by account perspective, we look at all of those elements. We look at what are they buying from you? How are they buying it? What's their usage like? What's their sort of long-term potential with you? And what do they value from you? What do they truly value? And the old Nagel Holden way of understanding value, which is how do you help your customer increase revenue, decrease cost, or mitigate risk, right? We measure that. So it's important to understand that by account, but it's also important to take that understanding of differentiation and apply it to your go-to-market and what we call a value-based organization. Are you a value-based organization? Do you have your sales folks ask and talk about value on a regular basis, not just right before a big negotiation of a contract, but throughout the year? Do they talk about it? Do they get that information and do they pass it along to customer service, to product development, all of those things? Are you truly a value-based organization? Because if you're not, then you're not going to go as far on that y-axis and you're going to be stuck in the bottom and you're not going to be able to get the returns that you're able to get.
I see. And I know internally for me, the plural of anecdote is not data, but I always get the sense that a lot of our member companies that I know pretty well seem to have a lot more focus on the price differentiation part of that than the go-to-market part of that. And you gave a couple of great examples there of where people were not able to scale, not able to get their products and goods and services where they needed, not able to get the support, the training, the communication that their customers needed. And I know at one of our events last year, I did a horrible example in my opening address. It's probably on the PPS website, but don't look it up. It was horrible. And I talked about social media and about how before Facebook, before MySpace, there was Friendster. It was great. They invented this thing where you connect people, but they were not able to go to market. They were not able to scale up. They grew so quickly that their load times became so long that even though they had a better initial IP than MySpace and better than the original versions of Facebook and things like that, the wait times were so big that they could not present a good product to their customers, and they evaporated. And now they exist basically as a gaming forum in the Philippines, if I remember right. But there are a lot of great examples about that, how the go-to-market capabilities, the aligning sales, pricing, communication, marketing, product teams, all of the above, particularly when things are moving very quickly, how that's very important. So with that in mind, what are some of the most effective ways to build the alignment between pricing and sales and business leaders and product managers and the supply chain when things are going crazy to keep everyone moving in the same direction?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'm going to pause right here, Kevin, because my teams seem to have crashed. So I have no visibility of you.
Uh-oh.
So I
Okay.
apologize. Let me
And
see.
also, Alex, I'm here in the office and our internet is spotty and I just had to reconnect it. So I might be disappearing as well.
Okay.
Well,
You,
yeah, it's going to be Monday all day on today on Wednesday here.
you are back, by the way. So I'm
Yeah.
Okay.
So far, everybody's good on my end. I've been able to hear and see you just fine.
okay.
Okay.
Great. So Kevin, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that, you and I have had these discussions also is pricing is so wonderful because it's cross-functional.
Right.
It goes horizontal. And I love that about pricing because we go cross-functional and we touch so many other departments, divisions, people, capabilities. It's just wonderful. That's one of the reasons I love pricing so much. Is I'm not bucketed into one thing and only one thing. My 25 personalities can't handle that. I need all the cross-functional stuff I could get. But it's important to understand that pricing is part of sales. It's an extension of you're a salesperson essentially. If you're a
Right.
pricer,
You are.
you're a salesperson. So if we have the mentality that a salesperson is not out to undermine my price, but rather are we as pricers doing everything we can to provide the tool sets that sales needs to be successful? Do they have the tiered offering? So when they come up against a price buyer, they know how to take value off the table and give them the least amount of value so they can get down to the smallest price for that price buyer. Do they have that? Or are you allowing them to just kind of free-nilly, choose whatever they want? Because if somebody just gave me all the reins, I'm probably not going to make the best decisions. If I get some guidance and get the right tools, then I am all of a sudden better equipped to make the right decision. So I think there's a big question that's out there that we need to ask ourselves, which is for the different types of customer engagements that are out there, are sales properly equipped to handle those types of engagements? And I will tell you, the more clients that I see now, I feel like pricing, PPS is a great example of it. We've really understood that x-axis, that differentiation, that value, price alignment. The software companies have done a great job of, Zilliant and Vendavo and PriceFX and all these guys of really understanding, hey, here's your price model. Here's, how you stick to your price. And that's great. So I think that x-axis is good, relatively speaking. But the y-axis, there's tremendous amount of gaps. There's so many gaps. You go to product development. I go and say, how do you know which features you need to release? And they're like, well, it depends on who's complaining about what. So it's this old mindset of, the squeaky wheel gets the priority, which is really a terrible way to do it because it has no alignment to value. And you don't know if you're going to make up the returns for what feature you're building. And so there's a lot of gap that's there. So I would start with some of those foundational things that says, that customer, what are the different types of customer engagements do we have? And is the go-to-market team well prepared to handle those engagements? Do they have the right tool set? Then after the tool set, I would have a conversation about capabilities. So if we gave them a tiered offering, the second question would be, do they know how to use a tiered offering for those customer engagements? Do they have the right capabilities? What can I do to teach them, help them of why that tiered offering exists the way it does?
Definitely. And the cross-functionality element of pricing and revenue management, I agree. That's one of the things that definitely makes it interesting. And we've also had this discussion where we have to be artists and scientists and change managers and all of the above. But we also have to talk with all of these different groups in a language that they can understand.
Yeah.
So, for example, the way that we deal with a veteran 25-year salesperson might be completely different in how we deal with a brand new top 10 MBA who's a financial wizard or an analytical person or something like that. You can't approach those two individuals in the same way, but you have to be able to approach those two individuals in a way that they can understand as well. And also, I like how you start with the tool sets to make sure that's covered, and then you go to the capabilities. And of course, this is part of your book and a lot of the things that are one of your main areas of expertise when we talk about negotiating and about how we deal with our customers. And we can have internal customers, external customers, sideways customers, and all of the above. And also the very, very good point that we are all salespeople as far as ideas and getting things across. And some of our salespeople are pricing people as well when the negotiations happen, sometimes with the customers. So there is that great Venn diagram overlap. And of course, as pricing leaders, we have to be connected with everything, operations as well, marketing, product management, finance, sales, senior management, all of the above. But yes, we do not have the same job in every situation on every same day. It can vary quite a lot, and it's our job to be able to talk in all of those different languages. So thank you for the explanation there. That's great. And we are coming up on time a little bit here, but I do want to ask one more question, and that is for pricing professionals who are listening today, what's one step that they can take immediately in their offices, in their discussions, to start strengthening their pricing power in the face of all the volatility that we're facing right now?
You know, I think knowledge is power, right? And I think one of the gaps that we do see out there, and I think one of the biggest steps is obviously internally you have to know and understand the impact of changes from your suppliers. You have to know that and how that affects your transactional price. But do you know and understand your competitive capabilities? Do you understand your competitors' reliance and their cost structure and who they buy from? And that's where we're seeing a lot of gap in that understanding. There's a lot of hypotheses, but that understanding is not quite there. Because that understanding really helps. That's the building block you need to be able to know what strategically, what you can absorb and what you can't absorb and what you can move the cost through. So that understanding of that competitor and that competitive capability is a gap that I'm seeing that's out there that's preventing you from having all the options and choices strategically to make decisions about your customers. And I think that's the one thing that I would encourage everybody to focus their attention on.
Yes, of course. If we only have our internal data points, you can't really determine trends or where you are in a product matrix or what your customer thinks about A versus B versus you versus someone else in that regard. So that makes perfect sense. Thank you for the explanation there. So something that we can all work on, we can all kind of get more external there, think about our customers, of course, as pricers and as revenue managers. Game theory should be top of mind at all times. So it's not just us making the best choice, it's us making the best choice in conjunction with the next move and competitive reactions and market reactions and macroeconomic reactions and everything that goes on there. So we have to be a piece of that puzzle and not be so internal and just thinking about ourselves and what we offer there. A great explanation. I like that so much.
Like you said about the bear, you just have to be faster. You don't have to be the fastest.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, we are not going to be able to outrun all of the things that are going on from a volatility standpoint, but we can improve our standing from an overall positioning by figuring out strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and so on and so forth there, and working on those where we can. So a great explanation there. So once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us for our podcast today. Make sure, if you have not already done so, but definitely do, absolutely would give the highest recommendation to Jeet's book, Pricing with Confidence, 10 Rules for Increasing Profits and Staying Ahead of Inflation. For the several hundred of us who are going to be at PPS Profitable in Dallas in May, make sure to check out Jeet's keynote with us on Friday morning. That would be May 9th, I believe. So I'm very much looking forward to that as well and other discussions there. So, Jeet, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the practical, actionable advice. And thanks everyone for tuning in to Let's Talk Pricing. Jeet, thank you so much.
Thank
Any
you very
final
much.
words from you?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
All right. We will look forward to seeing you soon. And again, thanks to our members for joining us. Make sure to stay tuned for upcoming versions of the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. And I look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thank you so much, Jeet. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.